Okay, so we're recording now. I'm Debbie Myers with Indivisible Durango, and this is week 5 of Weekly with ID, where we're trying to reconnect. And we decided, the coordinating council decided that we would do weekly meetings at least up until the election. Which is probably a good thing, so that we can talk about different issues and educate ourselves about the election. Again, we're not trying to preach to the choir, but if we're better informed, we can hopefully inform other people. So today we are focused on women's rights issues and just in general social justice issues. I was going to put on the notice that we sent out today some wording about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and the words could not come. They did not come. I mean, there is, we're just all grieving and very sad and very scared, and it's very apropos to hear from our speakers. So the first speaker is Katie Young. Katie, is your title still Community Outreach Coordinator?
No, I'm a campaign organizer.
Okay, so Katie, campaign organizer. So it would be might be helpful too. I don't know if you've had communication with other people at Planned Parenthood, but you might also share any. Katie is going to talk to us about Prop 115 and what Planned Parenthood is doing and how they're working with the community to oppose this. But it may be appropriate to share with us anything that has been, that you've discussed with anybody at Planned Parenthood since Ruth Bader Ginsburg died yesterday. So anyway, if you have any thoughts on that, that would help us. She sent me a lovely message last night, Katie did, and said, sending light your way. Boy, I needed that. So thank you. And I'll hand it over to you, Katie.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk to y'all about Prop 115. I'm hoping to be able to add Indivisible Durango to our list of endorsers, but we'll get to that later. First, I'm just going to give you a little bit of context on the campaign. So we have formed a coalition called Abortion Access for All in order to oppose 115. And participating organizations are the ACLU of Colorado, Cobalt, Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights, or CALOR, the Interfaith Alliance, New Era Colorado, Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains, and Progress Now Colorado. I tell you that because it's important context for how we're all working together on this. If you guys know me and have worked with me in the past, usually I organize around Planned Parenthood specific issues. I'm now almost totally focused on this campaign, and I'm actually the chair of field for this campaign. So I've totally hit the ground running. This is like our primary focus right now. So Prop 115, oh God.
You're there.
Okay.
You disappeared for a minute, but you're still there.
Okay, so I'm going to give y'all a little bit of the facts around Prop 115. I'm going to give you some of our messaging, some of the ways that we're talking about it, because the research has found that our base is like soft on this, and that people don't feel comfortable talking about abortion later in pregnancy. And I really want to make sure that we level set and get you all comfortable and prepared to be having these conversations ahead of the election. Yeah, okay. So it shouldn't take too long, but I'm going to jump right in. So Proposition 115 is a backdoor ban that would criminalize abortion later in pregnancy after 22 weeks. And it's brought by these same politicians and groups that have tried to ban all abortion in Colorado more than 10 times in the last 10 years. They are called Due Date Too Late. They also have one called End Birthday Abortions is the other name working on. I hate even saying that out loud because it's just so incorrect and horrendous. End Birthday Abortions. Yeah, and they're very well funded and they're very well organized. And if you all have any more questions about the opposition, about our opponents on this, I can follow up with more info, but essentially it's the same cast of characters that we're usually up against. The same people that are outside the health centers are the same people who are bringing these bans up again and again. Proposition 115 would ban abortion after 22 weeks and establish criminal penalties for medical professionals that provide this care, including fines and a suspension of their license for 3 years. The proposed ban has no exception for a woman facing a serious health condition. So there's no exceptions for a risk to the woman's health. But there is an exception for her life. There is no exception for when a pregnancy is the result of rape or incest. And it's very clear that the real goal of Proposition 115 is to force a pregnant person to remain pregnant in every case, except if an abortion is immediately required to save her life. We've found that some of our most effective messaging is talking about how every pregnancy is unique. Every woman's life is unique, and every circumstances that a person comes up against are unique. This is the kind of messaging that people tend to respond really well to. If you guys have more questions about what messages we found to work, which I imagine with this group you might, so let me know. Here I'll do like a little Q&A at the end. We also know that a ban like this would disproportionately harm Black women, people of color, Indigenous people, low-income women, and younger women who already face barriers and delays to accessing reproductive health care. And it's frankly, I mean, it's just another assault on abortion access from the same extremists who have tried and failed over and over again. Even though voters in Colorado have overwhelmingly rejected abortion bans, they know this is how they're going to get their foot in the door. Abortion later in pregnancy is really difficult to talk about, and it's one of the opponent's favorite talking points right now, this idea of like due date abortions or abortions up until birth. It's just something that's like some really hot rhetoric on the other side, and I think that's why we're seeing this happen, and we are 100% certain, especially after what's happened yesterday, if this passes in Colorado, we will see many more states be facing similar fights in the coming years. And with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing, we now have a Supreme Court that's hostile to abortion access, so we do not have a plan B. If 115 passes, abortion care in this country will change as we know it. It's not often that here in Colorado, at least in my experience, we are at the forefront of a battle like this. But this time we are. And it's really important that we give it all we have, because y'all, I've seen the numbers. We're getting the testing back and it's not looking good. We're at 51% no on 115 and 49% yes. It's neck and neck. And every single vote is going to count. Every single conversation that you have is going to count. So that's my like impassioned and serious plug. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about abortion later in pregnancy to give you guys some facts on that. But before I do we have any questions?
I'd like to, Karen has put a question on, well, it's not a question, it's a statement. 1.3% of abortions are done after 20 weeks. And isn't it true that most women don't even discover they're pregnant until 8 weeks? And so,
yes.
Go ahead.
It's actually less, Karen, than what you put in the chat. It's just about 1% of all abortions happen after 22 weeks.
Okay. Oh, 22
Yep.
weeks, not 20. Okay, so this is essentially halfway through pregnancy, the way I calculate it.
Yeah, well, yeah. We don't talk about it that way exactly, just because that's not the most effective messaging. I will also add, there's no medical like point where you've entered into an abortion later in pregnancy. Healthcare professionals aren't thinking about it this way. This is a political concept. The idea that there's a point at which you are now in an abortion later in pregnancy, like some shadow falls over you. The care changes in some ways, but this isn't a medical concept. It's a political one.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
I'd like to know what's being done at the state level to educate people. If the numbers are so close, percentage-wise, of yes and no voting, what are you and the other organizations doing on a statewide level to let people know that this is a bad deal?
So we are fully running a campaign, similar to a campaign that you would run for a candidate. We are running that level of a campaign on this bill. That means we're doing phone banks every week, text banks. We have yard signs, bumper stickers. I can get you guys all of that stuff if you want. We have a communications department and a website. It's expensive. There will be ads coming up in the next couple weeks as well. So it's a full-fledged ordeal of a campaign.
Because we don't get Colorado stations, we only get the news. We don't see all the ads. We do sometimes see Colorado ads on the Albuquerque stations. Is that part of the plan to show those ads on the Albuquerque stations too, where Colorado residents might get to see them?
A very small portion of the budget has been allocated to the New Mexico media market. And that's because most of our money is being focused on Colorado Springs for advertising. That's where a great deal of our persuadable voter base is going to be. Okay, what else do we have before I move on to talking a little bit more about abortion later in pregnancy?
Katie, I just wanted to ask, is there, and this may be too soon to know, but is there any plan for pouring more money or having the availability of more money since RBG died into this campaign?
We would love to have more money. We would love to have more money. Yeah, we're ongoing fundraising for this, and the budget has just, it's actually been difficult to get what we need. We've had some really generous donors. We've had some really great individual donors. If you're anyone wants to give us more money, head to the website, voteno115.com. We definitely need it. And hopefully, it's a little bit dark, but I think with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing, it's going to put into pretty sharp focus what's at stake here. And hopefully it will get maybe some more donors, maybe some more attention statewide.
Is NARAL contributing or no?
NARAL nationally is. I don't know if you're aware, but the Colorado affiliate of NARAL turned into Cobalt. They separated themselves from national affiliation. So we're working with Cobalt, previously known as NARAL.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Katie, I'd like you to read what I wrote I went to the Southwest Women's Lunch on Wednesday, And if you guys can't see the chat on the bottom, you can click on chat and see it.
Okay,
When
let's
Lauren
see.
Boebert said, huh?
I'm just looking at it here.
Lauren Boebert said that her opponent was endorsed by Planned Parenthood, and the whole room groaned. Okay, and then the lady for 115 spoke after her and said that in Colorado, women can have an abortion up until their due date, and then added that the woman has 10 minutes to decide whether or not the baby can live. So these people are just sitting there in the room listening to this. These are grown women. And this is the message. Trump is amplifying this. So how do we do this?
I have no idea where that even comes from.
They make it up. They make it up, but I mean,
they make it up, and it's something that we're very aware of. That once the president starts speaking on this, we're in for a heck of a fight. This is not an easy one. This is not an easy one at all. This isn't I think a lot of times we get comfortable here in Colorado knowing that most folks vote blue or most folks vote in a certain way. This is tough. This is a really tough one. It's really tough for people to talk about. And, those folks in that room, Karen, those folks were never going to vote for us.
No, I know that.
What's scary
talking to other people.
And what's scary is that our base voters feel insecure about this issue. Our base voters don't feel equipped to talk about this. Our base voters are concerned and feel like, something I keep hearing is that, well, wouldn't a 22-week restriction be a compromise? Wouldn't it be a reasonable compromise? This is a concerted national effort to ban all abortion. It's a slippery slope. And they've made that very clear. They want to ban all abortion. And they know that this is how they're going to get the foot in the door to do it.
I have a question.
What's up?
So are you finding either in your polling or just your strategy that, we've got just an overwhelming election between it being Trump and all the negativity that's creating, and then all the other ballot initiatives? I mean, is the base soft because they're just tired and overwhelmed, or is it just purely the issue?
Well, based on what we have so far, it's the issue. And that's because our polling is happening at this point, right? So come the end of October, burnout is going to be a much more real factor. We've been polling on this since, oh Lord, what even is time?
It's the 19th of September.
Yeah, we've been polling since June on this. So before most folks even knew about it. I think that your hunch is correct, that folks will get very burnt out on all issues.
Well, is there some channel where we can disseminate accurate information, for example, on the ID website, or possibly a well-written letter to the editor? Is there somewhere where we can get accurate information out there?
Bingo, Carolyn. I'm going to actually put a pause on that. I have, of course, you know me, I have calls to action and I have asks to make. But really quick, I'm just going to run through a couple talking points about abortion later in pregnancy for y'all to write down and remember so that you can feel comfortable having these conversations. Like Karen mentioned, abortion care later in pregnancy represents about 1% of all abortions, even a little less. It's often necessary because of a complicated web of barriers that prevent her from getting an abortion as early as she would like. Also, often in cases of abortion later in pregnancy, a woman finds out new information about a risk to her health or a lethal fetal diagnosis at a later point in pregnancy. Lots of folks, as we know, don't live near a health center. A lot of folks don't have the money readily available, including like childcare, time off work. I mean, it can become a very expensive endeavor. And it takes a lot of time to gather information and resources in order to make a decision. This is an arbitrary political deadline that puts undue pressure on a woman's ability to seek care. It's also, and this is one of our best talking points, it's a one-size-fits-all mandate, which ignores the uniqueness of each pregnancy and allows the government to dictate personal health decisions that should be left up to patients and their doctors. Proponents of this measure are intentionally spreading disinformation about abortion later in pregnancy and using deceptive language to confuse voters. This is also something we found to be very effective. People don't like it. People don't like to feel tricked and lied to. So whenever we point out that the ballot is intentionally confusing and that they're intentionally spreading misinformation in order to stigmatize women and stigmatize abortion care, we found that to be pretty effective. And this is also an issue that has been long settled in Colorado. People also are kind of sick of talking about this. We have decided many times as Colorado voters that we believe that abortion care should be legal, and they keep bringing it up and they won't stop because it's part of a nationwide agenda. Yeah, we see again and again that Coloradans across all party lines believe that concern for a woman's life and health, not politics, should drive these important medical decisions. So those are a couple of our best talking points there. I hope you guys find those useful. And then
I just had a thought that came to me. Could it be considered a form of socialized medicine? That is, the government telling women that this is how they have to control their health care, and not leaving it up to the individual person and their doctor. So a form of socialized medicine, which many people, of course, are opposed to in this country.
Right. That's a good connection. I will say that we actually face a little bit of backlash in the polling when we draw connections between like government intervention, if we too hotly press that button, because people feel like if something wrong is happening, that the government should intervene. So it's a little bit complicated. I will say though that for every conversation that you're having about this issue, it's really good to meet the person you're talking where they are. If you're talking with someone who's, a libertarian, whose the number one thing that they vote on is limited government intervention, that's going to be a really useful talking point. And that's going to be a really useful way to hammer this home, that it's inappropriate for the government to intervene on a healthcare decision. Okay. Any other questions?
I wanted to point out in the chat, the League of Women Voters Mesa is having a Zoom discussion on Monday at 7, and how you can go get it. So are you going to be on that chat, Katie?
I wasn't aware of it, Karen.
Today from our League of Women Voters, and so they're asking their members to join in on this. So I don't even know where Mesa County is because I haven't been here that long. Where is it?
That's Grand Junction, I believe, right?
Oh boy. That would be a good discussion. I plan to be on that one. So it's.
Okay, if you forward me the invite, I'll join. Okay, so next up, as far as our next steps, like I said, this is a fully running campaign. We have phone banks every week as well as text banks. If anyone wants to hop on calls with me, it's not fun, but it gets the job done. We are also always looking for folks who want to write LTEs, especially in this area, in our region. That's really effective. We've already had a couple. We had one go out to the Cortez Journal and one to the Herald. If you're interested, I will put my email address in the chat, and just reach out to me. You can either just give me a heads up that you're going to send one. You can ask for help writing it, whatever works for you. Just, give me a heads up and we'll work it out if that's what you want to do. I'll also share, what I'll do is I'll follow up with Deb and get like our social media resources dropped in the notes as well, because we have some good like graphics you can share on your social media page, and I'll make sure to get that for the Indivisible page as well. I'd also like to add Indivisible as official endorsers of the campaign. When you go to voteno115.com, there's a page of endorsers. It's an awesome group. It's varied. We have faith leaders, we have political leaders, we have advocacy organizations, other Indivisible branches statewide, and I would love to get you guys added to it.
Katie, we didn't, I'm glad you're talking about that, because we can make a decision right after this meeting from the council as far as endorsing our women's, Michelle from our women's committee didn't feel comfortable or didn't feel like she could endorse it. So we can talk about that right afterwards, and sounds like we'd be pretty supportive, so.
Great. Well, that's all I have for you. Like I said, I will make sure that you have plenty of follow-up information on the Vote No website, our social media channels, and make sure that Indivisible has the resources to share stuff on your social media channels, excuse me. Are there any other questions I can answer? Is there any other way I can be of service on shedding some light on this?
What's your email? Put that in the chat.
I'll put it in the chat right now.
Turns out I can't find it.
Yeah, I'm pondering this, and I think the biggest argument that's caught me so far, Catherine, is, Katie, is the fact that this is a slippery slope, that there's no medical reason to cut it off at 22 weeks, and that this is just a slippery political slope. That's what I think caught me, because I think since this only applies to 1% of all abortions, and I'm sure there are very special circumstances that, you know, each one, like you say, is an individual circumstance. So I think this, for me, the strongest argument is that.
Yeah, that's where my head is at as well. It's so so obviously politically motivated, and their real goal is made clear. I mean, they've said it themselves.
For those of you listening to the recording, I don't know if you're seeing the chat on the screen, but Katie Young's email is Catherine, and that is spelled KATHARINE. Don't make the mistake of an E, .young@pprm.org. PPRM is Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains. So Katie, thanks so much for sharing that. And I hope you can stay on. You may be busy, but maybe you can stay on in case anyone has any other questions. We did want to go on to our next speaker. So Lynn Sholler has from the Civil Rights Committee has agreed to share some of the updates since she's been involved in some of the social justice issues in the area, and the BLM, not being the BLM we heard about last week, which is Bureau of Land Management, but Black Lives Matter. And Lynn, I'll let you introduce your guest, Tracy, too. And Lynn was going to share with us even a cultural sensitivity class that she's been attending and what she's learning. So I'll let you take it away. Unmute yourself. Lynn, are you muted?
Yeah, Lynn, we can't quite hear you. Can you unmute?
Upper right corner, hit unmute. Can you, who started this? Debbie, did you start the Zoom? Can you unmute Lynn?
I'm trying.
Even lower.
Try now.
Oh yeah, but I mean up in the top too. Either anyway.
I'm looking by her name, and I clicked on unmute. Did we hear you before, Lynn?
Make sure your speakers are on your
I think
computer.
we
are
could
turned
hear
on.
Lynn before. I think we did hear her say something when Raleigh complimented her on her haircut.
Unmute.
Now you're muted, so unclick whatever you just clicked.
I'm unmuting her.
Yeah, you see how it shows up that she's muted in the lower left corner?
I know. I wonder if I can. I'm unmuting her. It's not unmuting on my end.
Your very lower left corner.
With your mouse. I mean, you have to use a mouse.
Yeah, or even hit the space bar. Can you type in the chat box?
Thank you.
Your speakers aren't set up right on the thing. Same trouble I had.
Yeah, well, sometimes, Lynn, you need to get out and come back in. Tracy, are you with us? Can we hear you?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay.
I try your phone instead. See if you can get on in your phone.
Do you want Tracy to go ahead and talk
You
about?
said to go ahead.
Yeah, I think she's saying yes.
Yes.
And
Okay,
you can
Tracy,
type
do you
it
want
down.
to share with us, because we haven't all been involved in the activities in Durango and what's been going on, and I think you were going to share some personal experiences as well. So take it away.
Yes. Okay. I understood it was the topic is kind of like all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter. But I'm with Southwest Movement for Black Lives. We get called BLM, you know, in town. I think anyone who's part of this movement seems to get grouped with BLM. But Southwest Movement for Black Lives is separate. And we have our Friday vigils at Buckley Park. It's every Friday at 7 o'clock.
6
It's
o'clock. 6 o'clock.
oh yeah, sorry, it's been changed to 6 o'clock. Thank you, Karen. Thank you. Yeah, we just changed it to 6 o'clock because of the change in daylight. And so it's really kind of turned into more of an educational setting and about creating awareness around what causes these disparities and the racial injustice, economic injustices, Black political power, divesting, allocating, and what changing the system looks like. And for me, you know, this started with George Floyd, the death of George Floyd. And we got out there and we started marching. It just kind of all came together. And then it became what it is now with this meeting every Friday and wanting to keep this momentum, because a lot of times we hear that there is no racism here in Durango. Like I've heard that a lot. And for Black and brown people, it's not our reality at all in this town. But a lot of that is because we don't have a very diverse population. There's not much exposure and experience with Black and brown people. You know, with a predominantly white town, it's going to be your experience with each other, and you don't really get to see that so much. And so my personal experiences are what really motivate me to keep going and doing this work in this community, because it's something we face basically daily. You know, there's a lot of microaggressions that happen at work when you're downtown. And work has been like the biggest issue for me in terms of discrimination. And it kind of just turns your life upside down, because you have to, a lot of times you're trying to deal with it. If you're trying to cope and deal with the discrimination that happens through subtle racism and microaggressions at work here in Durango, it's wearing down your mental and emotional state, your health, and you're trying to cope and get through work. And you try to, when you're coping with it, you're coping with it by yourself, because there aren't many people like us to talk to and to confide in. There aren't many other Black people There are a number of Native Americans, but it's when we share with each other and not really with, white people, because what happens is they say, oh, well, are you playing the race card? Are you playing the victim? Because that's kind of what happens, And I even have a church, and I thought I could confide in them because they're about, love and compassion, being like Jesus, So I was like, this is somewhere I can share and confide and get some support, because at a certain time I didn't have a lot of brown people around me, and it was the same thing. It was, okay, well, a lot of times though, when stuff happens to Black people, they get stuck on that and they play the victim. Don't you think maybe that person just didn't know? And it just feels like you're getting assaulted again. And it's these type of situations that happen time and time again, not only to me, but a lot of other people, to where you just no longer want to open up about it. You don't want to talk to anyone about it. And for me, it was a situation at the hospital. Once I got into working in these medical settings, it really, really became clear to me that there's just a lot of discrimination. There's basically this lack of acceptance, and you just feel oppressed because it goes on for so long without any support, without it being acknowledged. And for me, it was at work, and this young girl, she's white. Well, she's not young. She's actually 40 years old. She's grown. She should be aware of, I would think, racial slurs and what they are, especially when someone says the N-word. And she used that word with me. I'm not going to get into the whole story, but she used the word, and I confronted her and told her that was not okay. And she said that, oh, well, I'm not racist. I said, well, what you said really makes it seem like you are. And she said, no, I'm not. I have Black family. I have Black friends. And it was like, well, why would you say something like that? And she said, well, she apologized, said she's not racist, came back and then said, I actually just don't know what that word means. I just thought, it was like slang. I didn't know it meant that. I said, well, that's hard to believe because you're a 40-year-old woman in America that's been through the school system. I was like, that's hard to believe. And she continued to say she didn't know. It went to the HR. They said they were going to give her a warning. But for me, it felt like, because that wasn't the first time. She had said our coworker's hair, he was Black. She said his hair looked like pubic hairs on multiple occasions, and kept calling him a thug. And she said he just looks like a gangster. He looks like a thug. And she would just be really disrespectful to him. And he ended up leaving and said he just didn't feel comfortable there. And I felt like, he had a lot of digestive issues that would happen. And he kind of concluded that it was because of the stress. And he was really young, and this was his first time in this professional setting. So he didn't know how to address certain things. And my heart just went out to him, because it's like, you are dealing with this first time. This is your first time in a predominantly white town and space and job. And you're nervous, and you're trying to, make the best impression and work hard and make a life for yourself. And then you have this on top of it, and you don't know how to cope and deal with this, or even confront it. Like, how are you even going to go about it? And it just like broke my heart to see him go through so much stress. He hated going to work every morning, but he felt grateful for the opportunity to be working in that office. But ultimately he left, and I was still there. And then finally I told them about the situations that had happened, what they said about him and his hair. And they said, well, you should have told us before, because now there's nothing we can do about it. And they said she was going to get a warning. And I said, well, I feel like this office should be of zero tolerance for any kind of hate speech. And they said, well, and ultimately they just said the warning was fine, the punishment fits the crime. But for me, it's hard to come to a workplace and know that someone is there who what it felt like is she's allowed to treat me this way, to think this way, to say these things. It has an effect, on your dignity, your emotional, mental state, feeling like your humanity has been completely like threatened in a way. And I just felt like this should just not be accepted, period. Like if you're going to say any kind of hate speech, you have to learn that this is not okay. To me, a warning was not enough. And it's like I'm forced to work with someone who talks like this on numerous occasions, and it's allowed. And so I left that job. And then I started a new one. It was still with the hospital. And the situation that happened there was a woman was asking about my ethnicity. I told her what I was. I'm Black and Native American. And she said, you know, oh, I have a really diverse family. She's telling me she had like Black, Asian, Native American people, grandkids. And there was someone working next to us. And the next day, my supervisor calls me in and says, you know, we had a coworker complain that you were talking about your race and ethnicity, and that offended her. And I said, wait, what? It's like, why, how did that offend her? She's like, well, you know, certain things offend certain people, and it made her uncomfortable. I said, so I was talking about my race and ethnicity, and it made her uncomfortable. She said, yes. I said, well, it sounds like she has a problem. And they said, well, it's just like politics and religion. You don't really want to talk about it. I said, no, it's not like politics and religion. Politics and religion are views, perspectives, and beliefs. My race and ethnicity is how I exist in the world. It's not debatable. It's not changeable. I said, instead of talking to me, you should be talking to her. She's going against your mission statement for inclusion and diversity. I was like, how are you going to be inclusive and diverse if you don't acknowledge that which makes you inclusive and diverse? And they're like, well, you just want to be careful with what you say. And so I went to HR. I said, is there a policy that I can't talk about my race and ethnicity? And she said, no. I was like, okay, that's all I need to know. And I had even asked my supervisor, so what do you want me to say if someone asks me what my race and ethnicity is? So just tell me that makes you uncomfortable and that you don't want to talk about it. I said, well, it doesn't make me uncomfortable. And she said, well, I mean, why should they be asking me that in the first place? I was like, because they're curious, just like they ask anything, like, what's my name? Where did I come from? How long have I worked here? Like, it doesn't bother me at all. So, well, we just really need to not talk about those things because you never know what's going to offend someone. And so that continues. And I mean, that's what I'm kind of dealing with right now as it is. And then as stuff happens with George Floyd and we're doing these vigils every Friday, you know, I feel like people around the community are starting to know, they're starting to recognize me. And there was someone, I'm thinking this played a part in what happened, but there was a coworker and she was white. And I started by me complimenting her hair. And she walks up, she has her face mask on. And she says, you know, I hate wearing my face mask. I don't wear them out in public. I don't care what people say. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I wasn't going to argue with her. And then she said, but you know what? I'm not afraid of COVID. I'm actually afraid of Black Lives Matter. I said, what? Why? She said, because they're racist and they're ridiculous. I said, no, they're not. They're fighting for racial equity, racial justice. How is that racist? And she said, because I've been mistreated. I've been discriminated against. Native Americans are racist to me because I'm white. I was like, are you sure? She said, yes. I said, well, what did you do about it? And she said, well, I left. I go, oh, well, you got to leave. We don't get to do that. I was like, it's a good thing you got to leave. And she was like, well, it's just people act like just Black people are facing hard things, but I am too. I have a hard life. I don't have any privilege. I said, well, I don't think you understand what privilege means, white privilege. And she said, no, I've had a hard life. I said, but as being privileged, you know, white privilege is not that you haven't had a hard life. I'm sure you have. A lot of people have. I was like, but it hasn't been made harder because of the color of your skin. And she's like, she starts talking over me. Black lives don't matter to me. White, all lives matter. Black lives don't matter to me. All lives matter to me. And she's shouting at me. And then she says, bet HR is going to hear from me about you. Bet HR is going to get onto you. And she goes, I said, okay, well, you're doing it right now. I was like, you're using your privilege right now. She said it with 100% belief. Even though she initiated this conversation, you know, she started this entire thing saying, you know, Black lives don't matter to me, all lives matter. She said it with 100% confidence that I'm the one that's going to get in trouble. She will be backed by HR. Like, she believed it without a doubt. The look on her face, the tone in her voice, like, I'm going to get in trouble for this, for having this view. And she walked out and went straight to HR. So I told my supervisor, the manager of the office, and they said I could talk to HR. So they got headquarters in Denver involved and did a conversation via phone. And ultimately they wrote me up as well because I participated in the conversation with her. And yeah, and it's nothing, they said they can't tell me what happened with her. Like, she was there, nothing, you know, she was there working like normal. So, I mean, she definitely wasn't suspended or anything. But they said, you know, you should never talk about politics in the office. You should have been the one to stop the conversation. So you are being written up as well, which I don't think is right either. But when these situations happen, like, I can talk to you about them now, but when they happen, I just feel the discrimination, the injustice, almost like this bullying, this being targeted. I get angry, I'm shaking, and I feel like my skin gets hot because I'm just so angry because I feel like there's nothing I can do. You know, HR obviously wasn't going to do anything. What do you do in these situations? In the last jobs I had, I left. And there's a lot more stories and situations. It's been like that for the past few years. I've left the last 3 jobs due to this type of treatment. And it affects your livelihood. You know, you have to, I told myself I'm never going to do that again. Never going to stay somewhere where I'm mistreated, because it literally makes me sick, just like it did to the black man who was working and left. He kept having digestive issues, didn't know what was going on. And the same thing would happen to me. I would get migraines and nausea and extreme fatigue. I would walk out of work and just fall asleep in my car for 3 hours. And I kept thinking, okay, I'm sick, something's wrong. Went to the hospital and they're like, I think you need to leave your job. Like, I really think you need to leave your job. And the day I did, I never had another symptom. I was like elated. It felt like the world came off my shoulders. And so, you know, and I'm not the only one dealing with this stuff. It's a lot of Black and brown people facing these issues in town. And I feel like none of these employers are being held accountable. So what we want to do is start to form ways to hold these employers accountable, to expose what's going on in the town. At the vigil, you know, we share a lot of personal experiences, and we share the different platforms and strategies for change on a national level as well, with Movement for Black Lives, for economic justice. And when we do share our personal stories, we get a lot of feedback because they come up to us afterward and we talk and mingle, and they share that they never knew. And that was actually a shock to me. They said, I had no idea stuff like that was going on in Durango. And part of me is like, really? Like, you know, I'm shocked. But it makes sense that, you know, in this predominantly white town, you don't know. You only know your own experience. But it's important to see that, because it does run people out for that lack of acceptance and that mistreatment. And people leave. I've known a lot of people, and some of the Black women who were along with me in this have moved. And they said, like, they're here to support and they're here to do the work. They're like, but I am leaving. And they said, I can't do this. And I said, you can feel it. Even when you just walk into a restaurant, you feel it here. And some of that I didn't pick up on, I think, because I've been here for so long. I've been here for 13 years. And some of the Black people come from bigger cities. They're like, no, this is not okay. And some of them were like, well, Tracy, when this is done, you need to get out of here. Like, when you finish this work, get out of this town. It's not okay. You need to know what it's like to be around people that are like you and support you, because you're coming up against all these conflicts. And so it's people, brown and Black people, leaving this town because of this treatment, because of the discrimination, because of the systemic racism and institutionalized racism that's happening in this town that people keep saying doesn't exist. And, you know, it comes to people acknowledging their privilege and their fragility, humbling themselves, educating themselves, and the town really working to promote diversity and inclusion. And I'm really grateful, you know, with the city council keeping the memorial there. It started a bigger conversation, and it's more than our organization. It is now the community who is contributing to this memorial, and it's become a place where people feel like brown and Black people can come and meet other brown and Black people and kind of empower each other. And they say they feel like it's a safe place for people of color to come and join, and especially on Fridays, and listen and have conversations. And so, you know, I think our goal is to really expose and hopefully eradicate. Excuse me?
Did someone just say?
Oh,
Jump in there? Oh, sorry, Tracy. I don't know if someone jumped in. But why don't you finish that? And then, Lynn, are you, do you have sound now? Lynn?
You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm not
I'll
sure what
let you
happened.
too.
Oh, I can hear.
That's my first time using it, but you heard me when I got on, so I don't know why it wasn't working. But so sorry about that, but we wanted Tracy to go first anyway.
Tracy, thank you so much. That's so helpful to hear.
You're welcome.
And there's just, sometimes it's so subtle. Being white, when you see somebody Black in Durango, I have found, and this was more years ago, but like my husband teaches at the fort, and he said there's probably about a couple hundred students that are Black now at Fort Lewis. But it's almost like, I feel like when you said you walk into a restaurant, I almost feel like it's when somebody walks down the street that everybody's head turns and goes, oh, there's somebody Black in Durango. And I can't, just the feeling must be really, really strange. And so that's one comment that I would make. And then the other one, I'm Jewish. And I, in a work environment, it was actually in the school district, I would sit in an administrator's meeting and people would talk about Jewing somebody down for a bid. And it was like, oh, I was so embarrassed for them almost, but they didn't realize how that was making me feel. And it was interesting, even at a cultural diversity workshop that I went to in California, a Native American who was there as part of the workshop said, we can Jew him down. And I had to tell, I thought, oh, I was so embarrassed, but I said, no, you know, I need to say something because he's learning. And he was so embarrassed. But just words and language that we use, or looks, or, you know, just these subtle messages, I think can contribute. So that's all I wanted to say. And then if you want to, it's 5 o'clock, so I just wanted to mention that. But if you're want to keep going, and Lynn, if you have some other stuff you want to share, go ahead.
I do. I had about 15 minutes, so I'll try to trim it down a bit. But if people need to go, that's fine. So those of you who don't know me, I'm Lynn Sholler, and I am a civil rights attorney. But I'm also a white woman of privilege, and I have a disclaimer here. I am not an expert on history or racism or how Black people experience racism. And thank you, Tracy, for sharing your information. And it's hard to hear, but we need to hear it. And since we're so predominantly white, we don't see what you see through your lens. So what I have to share is through my lens, which is all that I have. So I have been taking some classes on waking up to whiteness and white privilege over various times in the past 4 years. So I'll let you know what I've learned so far. I want to talk a little bit about history. I wanted to put things in context. Whites' reaction oftentimes when they hear about racism is defensiveness, thinking, I'm not a racist, I'm a good person, and I came from good family values. But racism is not only wearing white hoods and carrying torches, but racism is a structure. It's not an event. And so humans in countries and tribes all over the world have colonized other countries and tribes since the beginning of time, and that includes America. So of course we know that Columbus did not discover America. Our indigenous people were here first. And since then, America has had 400 years of violence, including destruction of property and people. It's how our nation was established. It's a system of advantage based on race. And our economy is structured around racial exploitation of others. It's embedded in our historical system of institutional power. So let's lean into that and think about our first indigenous people, Native Americans. English settlers came here in the 1600s, offering poor people a better place to live. And the colonists needed to rely on Indians for food and resources, but there wasn't much reciprocation. By the 1718s, the colonists relocated the Indians further and further away from their homeland. Treaties were broken. Government attempted to regulate Indian affairs, and troops were trained to fight them. Eventually, we slaughtered many of them, including women and children. And by the 1880s, we forced Indians into boarding schools. We destroyed their culture. We took them away from their families. We made them cut their hair. We made them speak English, made them wear American clothing. They were beaten if they spoke their own language. We deprived them of their cultural foods and their dances. They had to assimilate to survive. The motto back then was, kill the Indian, save the man. So this was institutional domination. We know a little bit more about slavery from our history books. Also in the middle of the 1600s, we imported and enslaved Africans for free labor under ruthless conditions. So this was just another layer of domination of people. It is common knowledge that by the 1770s, many of our founding fathers and the wealthy owned slaves. And then slave owners raped Black women to generate more free slaves to work in their fields to make more money, yet pay them little, if anything. By 1776, our drafters of the Declaration of Independence said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. But that was a lie. Only white men had equality. In 1788, our Constitution allowed slave owners to count slaves as 3/5 of a person for establishing congressional representatives. By 1793, the Fugitive Slave Act was enacted, where whites captured slaves who escaped to the north and re-enslaved them again. By 1850, we had a second Fugitive Slave Act, punishing Northerners who aided escaping slaves via the Underground Railroad. And then this one really breaks my heart as a lawyer. Sorry. The United States Supreme Court in 1857, in the Dred Scott case, determined that Congress did not have the authority to ban slavery, and African Americans could never be citizens. Yet the North supported ending slavery, which resulted in the Civil War after the Confederate States seceded because of the issue of slavery. In 1863, the Lincoln Emancipation Proclamation was signed, but that did not free the slaves. It only said that slaves could join the Union Army and then their freedom could not be denied. By 1865, the Civil War ended, and that's when the 13th Amendment was passed, where slavery was abolished, as well as involuntary servitude, except for punishment for criminal convictions. So that exception allowed for mass incarceration of Black people. Former Confederate soldiers became the police and judges. And from then until now, the prison system makes money by incarcerating convicts disproportionately who are people of color who receive harder sentences than whites. And the prisons continue to essentially obtain free labor. Prisoners earn 12 cents an hour. for their mandatory work. So right after that, in the same year of 1865, the KKK was formed. Jim Crow laws were established, and those lasted until 1965. We had horrific lynchings, which were family and public events for entertainment. Then after the Great Depression in 1935 to the 1960s, the government implemented policies for redlining that would segregate the races, keeping blacks in inner cities and housing projects, but not in the suburbs, because it would decrease housing values and putting their insurance at risk. So finally, by 1965, the Civil Rights Act passed, banning discrimination. Because of television, when people saw the peaceful protests and the beatings of John Lewis and other peaceful protesters, they put pressure on Congress to pass that bill. But still, the beatings didn't stop. There was the assassination of Martin Luther King and others, and Black men, women, and children have died since by police brutality. So we can all agree that we have not yet established equality. So this is the history that white people have inherited. It's not that white people are bad, but we have benefited from racism. So that's what white privilege is about. So when people say all lives matters, or I don't see race, it marginalizes the Black and brown people's life experiences that they have suffered their entire lives, that have been passed down generation after generation after generation. Those historical stories go with the families that come down. So really what it comes down to is dominant culture versus a subordinate culture. The dominant culture defines social norms, the subordinate reacts or assimilates. Dominant culture controls resources, the subordinate fight for resources. Dominant culture has a social presumption of superiority, while the subordinate is presumed to be inferior. So this is why we call it systemic racism. This is how our history has come down, and even though we might have individually not participated or didn't think so, we benefit. The decision, well, here's one point, that whiteness is so dominant that we need to recognize it as racism. And when there's white dominance, it makes other people feel invisible or less than. So that's why Tracy has those nauseous feelings and migraines and feeling inferior, I'm sure. Most of the decision makers in America are overwhelmingly white. They hold the social and institutional power to make laws, policies, and social norms. So in the White Fragility book, which is a very popular book, as of 2016 and 2017, between 96% and 100% government officials, United States government officials anyway, were Black. 100% of top military are Black. Who decides what TV shows we watch, what books we read, what news is covered, what music is produced, and what top grossing films are made? Those are between 85 and 95% white. Even teachers are 82% white. Full-time college professors are 84% white. So you can see the power differential with those statistics. And then with white privilege, that's where we white people take for granted that we've benefited from being a dominant culture. A college professor in 1988 in women's studies described it as, we have advantages, an invisible package of unearned assets that I can count on cashing in every day. And she gave 50 examples, and I'll summarize a few of them. To be confident that I can rent or buy whatever property I can afford. I expected that I could be accepted into a good college based on my grades. I can see people of my race widely on TV or the front page. I'm confident I'll be hired for the work I'm qualified for. But would you if your name was Lakeisha or Jamal? I've heard of situations where Jose would change his name to Joe just to try to get an interview. I can find food that fits my cultural traditions at the supermarket. I can find a hairdresser that can cut and style my hair. Whether I use cash, check, or credit card, my skin color does not work against my appearance of financial reliability. I do not have to educate my kids to be aware of systemic racism for their own daily physical protection. I am never asked to speak for all people of my racial group. And it goes on and on. So that's some of the examples of the invisibility and the ignorance that we hold as white people who don't even understand these issues because we don't have to experience them. So what can we do about that? Well, we can attend these rallies at Buckley Park and learn more information from Tracy and her colleagues, but it's time to wake up from our collective ignorance, and it's not a 2-hour class. This is lifelong learning. So there are dozens of books on the topic. Get online and educate yourselves about Black history beyond slavery and Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman. Listen rather than react defensively. Also, don't forget about the Native Americans, the Chinese who were discriminated against when they built the Transcontinental Railroad, and as miners, the Japanese internment camps. We have dominated people throughout our history, and it's depressing, but we have to acknowledge it and explore your own family heritage. Have you benefited in any ways by industries that your ancestors have been in? We all are living on previous native land here that we stole from them. Think about what advantages you've benefited from that you never saw before. Socialize and work with people outside your tribe that think and look just like you. And if we work at it, we can make some progress. So,
Lynn, thank you so much. That's really good information. I want to add one other resource. If any of you have not seen, and it was triggered it because you're talking about know your roots too. Henry Louis Gates Jr., who hosts Knowing Your Roots or on PBS, is a fabulous show. Hosts and I guess this was made last year, the history of Reconstruction, which is post-Civil War. Boy, is it an eye-opener. It's a series. I highly recommend you watch that because it really shows just when you think you're making progress and how things go worse than they were before. And it's depressing, but it's really eye-opening, something that none of us, I think, were educated in school about. So just another really good resource. Does anybody have any questions for Lynn or Tracy? Or comments?
I have to wonder when the time is going to come when the culture of a whole workplace is such that if one person says that offensive word that Tracy, you talked about at the very beginning, that the other people, that you don't have to say a word, that your other coworkers jump in there and say, guess what? We don't say that kind of word here. I have to wonder if we're coming to a tipping point at all, and if perhaps the Black Lives Matter movement can help us reach the tipping point where the person who says that offensive word is disciplined by their own coworkers.
Well, that's a good point, Carolyn. And one of the taglines is silence is complicit. You know, it's time that you got to step in and say, that is not acceptable. Don't talk that way. It's harmful.
We had a workshop right after, Deb, you may recall, right after a certain party who's currently president got elected, And we had a workshop in the Smiley Building, and it was the very topic of it, and they had exercises to do this, is when you witness an event like this happen, speak up. Don't stay silent. Speak up. Even if you know the other person's going to disagree with you, speak up. And, you know, and so I've done that ever since I was in my 20s, is speak up if I hear offensive language happening, you know, racially offensive language. And every time I've spoken up, the offender backs down because they know what they're saying isn't right. So I'm just wondering when we're going to get, you know, to the tipping point, and why is it that Southwest Colorado isn't already there?
Tracy.
I think a lot of it has to do with policy and changing policy. There should be policy in place that does not allow this. It just shouldn't be allowed. I think that's the part of changing the system. I mean, reimagining it, because it's saturated. I mean, everywhere, every institution, it's the system itself. It doesn't protect us. It never was intended to protect us. And so it's going to continue to happen until we start to change the system and really hold people accountable. You know, I think at this point, we do talk a lot about reform and reforming, you know, law enforcement, reforming this and reforming that. But at this point, it's kind of like, that doesn't seem to be working, because we've been trying to do reform, you know, since the civil rights movement, and trying to get better and better. But every time they make something better or try to progress something else, they create another policy or law that goes right around it to continue the oppression in another way. It continues ever since the civil rights movement. There was always a way to still oppress us. I mean, you look at lynching. Oh, lynching stopped, segregation stopped, slavery is ended, but, well, we still have police brutality. We still have mass incarceration of Black men. They're just other forms of it. And so at this point, like, we're seeing this movement happen that's never happened before. No one's ever seen it. And, you know, even for all the civil rights leaders and Angela Davis, this is just something they've never experienced before. And so I think it's about reimagining the system. And right now, that's what it's about. That's why you see a lot of abolitionists at this point. It's like, we need absolute change to the system. And, you know, at that job, it should have been zero tolerance. It shouldn't happen. I know what I should be feeling and expect. It should be a zero tolerance. But everyone around me is like, well, I don't think she really meant it. You know, we gotta, you know, like, give her, you know, have patience with her and understanding. Don't you? They said, aren't you Christian? Don't you believe in compassion, Tracy? That's what was said to me. So I'm supposed to work it out and tolerate this behavior. And so I really think there should have been a policy in place. And I asked them, I said, well, have you gone over policy with the staff here? Do they know what is and isn't acceptable? Because I would assume this is zero tolerance. And they said, well, we don't have a policy book. We don't have any policy on this. And then when I got to the EEOC, they said they did have a policy book that came out of nowhere, but it's not authenticated in any way with, you know, what time or when this was created. And so it's just this complete manipulation. It's just absolute discrimination.
And then,
you know,
and Tracy, who's making the policy? Is it a bunch of white people that might
Exactly.
be making the policy, and they need to engage the, you know, more diversity on the group that actually creates the policy, or it's a useless policy because it's through their own white privileged filter. So, yeah. And I was going to say, generationally, it's improving, but you just gave us a couple of examples before where it wasn't. So that may be helpful, but that's not the answer. No. Any other questions or comments?
I'm putting a couple things in the chat. The PBS series is called Reconstruction: America After the Civil War. And the Case for Reparations is another great read. And
Oh, yeah.
the Mercy being a Catholic hospital. I don't know how many of you guys are aware that Catholic hospital systems, of which Centura is a huge, huge system, they plan to take over healthcare, and they are well over half the way there. So there's a lot of stuff online where people have investigated this. So if you want to see what Catholic hospitals are up to, I mean, they give good health care, but come on now, they will not do abortions. And now with, what is the law called where you can end your own life in Colorado? I forgot.
Euthanasia or the,
Yeah, but anyway, so we have that here, and California has it, where you can choose if you're terminal, end of life, they will not do it at Mercy. So it's putting their viewpoint on everyone in this county because they're the hospital.
Karen, before you got here years ago, for those of us who have been in the area for a long time, we had a community hospital, and it was funded by a bond issue, right, Carolyn? I think you're shaking your head. So, and the reason that the community felt so strongly about having a community hospital is to having an alternative to a Catholic hospital. So,
yeah.
And the other thing I was going to say, the other discrimination, if any of you have seen or experienced senior elder discrimination, that is really uncomfortable. And it's, you know, to Carolyn's point about speaking up, when you're feeling it, it's really uncomfortable. And you don't know how, it's hard to know how to speak up because you've, you know, in my case, I would feel like somebody younger just goes, oh, you know, that's silly. You're overreacting. And so there's so many, and so there's a big movement around that issue of the language we use, not calling people frail, elderly, that kind of thing. And in the workplace, it's a real issue. So.
I heard that in Tracy and you dealing with the Catholic hospital, that's some of the overlying umbrella that informs those people. So not that Catholic is discriminatory. I mean, I'm not making a big statement, but they certainly have their way of doing things. And I'm really sad that that's all we have here. I mean, I guess we have a surgical hospital, right? Animus Surgical. But Mercy's,
you know, more to Tracy's point, it's like, how is it congruous that a Catholic hospital, I grant you they have different religious beliefs on the items we talked about, but their underlying religious belief is Christ's teachings of love your neighbor as you love yourself. And, you know, how is allowing any of this in the workplace congruous with their mission statement? If they're going to have such a strong mission statement about, okay, we don't allow abortions and we don't allow euthanasia, okay, and they're basing that on their religion, there's no way you can base racism on any major world religion. And I mean, you can't, the teachings of Judaism, the teachings of Islam, all major world religions are founded on helping us get along with each other. So, you know, that's pretty, I take Tracy's point that it's pretty incongruous to have a Catholic hospital not, not being at the forefront of loving your neighbor.
Yeah, I bring that up because it's a political move for them, as many things the Catholic Church does. You know, I mean, the churches and the people in them, they don't even know this. People don't even, you know, this isn't in the big news. So it's really the political arm of the Catholic hospital push it's scary. So, And, you know, not to bring your issue, Tracy, down to this one hospital, you're really talking about universal issues. And when I worked for the government for 25 years, and I was a union member. And when we went in for some kind of conversation, we had a union rep come in with us. And if a supervisor held a conversation with someone without a union rep, that's really a big deal. And you'd lose your job or whatever, you know, depending on what it was. But I feel like someone should have been there with you, just sitting next to you in that meeting. I don't know if you have, you can call us, you call me. But, you know, if anything happens to people like that, they should get a third party to come and sit with them and just be in the room, because then the person on the other hand might not say, well, we're going to charge you too because you could, that's all so bogus. Anyway,
Yeah, that's a
for
good
that.
idea. An advocate.
Yeah, we talked about that. With some of the members of our group, like how to form that so that people don't feel alone. Because there's others who are other people of color that they experienced it at their workplace. They said they just felt so afraid. They didn't know how to handle the situation and intimidated. And they just kind of wanted to run away from the situation. They said they wish they had someone there with them.
Right.
And that's what I mean by holding these employers accountable as well, and having someone there, and like you said, like an advocate, I think would help a lot. But yeah,
And educating them. They need to be educated.
Training. I do discrimination prevention training, and every employer should get that at like every 2 years at least, especially if they have high turnover. So
It sounds like that HR department hadn't heard your training yet, Lynn.
apparently not. No, I have not been there.
Yeah, they've had hundreds. They said there's many cases for discrimination against them. I talked to a lawyer, and she said there's so many, and they drag it out in hopes that these people will just get tired of spending all the money and then just give up.
Right.
So yeah, it's an issue.
Yeah.
With the hospital.
Well, it is about 5:30, so we probably should stop the recording. And but before we do that, I do want to mention that next week, Doug, you're going to be talking about the national popular vote. Is that correct?
Woo, woo.
I think, yeah, I've got a contact. I haven't connected with him yet, but I understand a guy named Ben has an actual presentation
Waddell.
about that subject. I was going to do some follow-up related to the election. In fact, I started to develop a list of questions that I wanted to ask Tiffany Parker's office about some details, and I would relay that also.
Great, great. Well, we look forward to that. Okay, so thank you for listening in for our recording. I'm going to stop